1992 with a thesis that led to an important revision of Yellowstone National Park's history, titled Fear or Reverence Native Americans and the Geysers of Yellowstone. It was published in Yellowstone Science in 2001. I've been there. Went there with a best friend of mine. He was convinced that it had to be pipes underground shooting underwater. Then his doctorate later at the University of New Mexico, 2004, on interpreting the Anasazi myth, how the Pueblo Indians disappeared from the story, published in a chapter in Preserving Western History. He's continued his research since then. He's now volunteering as a volunteer at the Petroglyph National Monument. He's been a high school teacher in history for 11 years in Colorado, a seasonal ranger at Yellowstone and Mesa Verde and at Petroglyph National Monument. He has taught American history, history of the American West, American Indian history, history of the Civil Rights Movement, and other topics at Wayne State College in Nebraska for 16 years. And while at Wayne State, he supervised the training of social science teachers as well. Once he retired in 2023, he retired to Rio Rancho, New Mexico, where he serves as the chair of the Spiritual Assembly of the Bahá'ís there. He's a member of the Assembly's Indigenous Task Force. They've been doing some really fascinating work. I keep hearing about it from my friend Betty Fisher, who's on the task force as well. He was recently elected the chair of Walking in Beauty Incorporated, a nonprofit created to carry out its mission to build a memorial for the forgotten Indigenous children lost at the boarding schools. It also strives to empower Indigenous communities through educational programs and cultural initiatives that foster healing and dignity, resilience and capacity building, cross-cultural understanding, and the promotion of nobility of all humanity. So he's been doing a lot of good things, and we're going to hear about one of them today.
Thank you. This research actually is some of my first research when I began my academic career over 50 years ago. And then I went on to really change my focus to Indigenous peoples in the national parks. But being retired, I wanted to go back to some of this original research. And so I want to thank the Korean True History Center for allowing me the opportunity to present this earlier work as I sort of rethink things throughout my entire career and look for new synthesis that I think are important. So I want to talk about Quetzalcoatl, which I assume most of you have heard, and make an argument that Quetzalcoatl could have been a manifestation of God. And as I'll stress, we will never know for sure. The only one who can tell us that Quetzalcoatl was a manifestation is a manifestation. So it's more of a scholarly exercise, but I'll explain more. But that opens up this whole question, were there manifestations of God in the Americas? And I know there's been quite a lot of discussion of that lately. HighTeachings.org has done a whole series on that. Christopher Buck has written on that. And I've been sort of on the sidelines of that. In the Kitabi-Gan, Baha'u'llah specifically recognized Noah, Hud, Salih, and all these other manifestations on this chart here, most of whom, or many of whom, were unknown to Christians in the West, because they were local, tribal, I'd call them prophets or manifestations in Saudi Arabia. But I think that's a clue for us today. And I have my wife, Christy, she's going to be helping me by reading the quotes that I'll have up here. So let's read from the Kitabi-Gan.
And after Noah, the light of the countenance of food shone forth over the horizon of creation.
And then that passage, he goes on to explain how Hud was persecuted, and then goes into Salih. But I think what was most shocking to me when I read the Kitabi-Gan for the first time is we don't know who these prophets are. And here Baha'u'llah is telling us in the West that there's other prophets, that we maybe aren't ignorant of. Abdu'l-Baha then, during his ministry, recognized the Buddha and Krishna as manifestations of God. Now, Baha'u'llah also wrote in Gleanings,
His creation has ever existed, and the manifestations of his divine glory and the day springs of eternal holiness have been sent down from time immemorial, and been commissioned to summon mankind to the one true God. That the names of some of them are forgotten and the records of their lives lost is to be attributed to the disturbances and changes that have overtaken the world.
some of the names have been forgotten and the records of their lives lost. Some of the names are almost forgotten, and as a scholar, I think we should try to preserve them. I think out of respect for the manifestations and of all the manifestations of God, as scholars, we have a task here to try to rescue what we can of the past and preserve it for the future at a time when we still can. The Universal House of Justice, in a letter to an individual believer on September 1st, 1977, had more to say on this.
In a letter written on behalf of the beloved guardian, in reply to a question as to whether Brahma is to be considered as referring to an absolute deity, and Krishna as the prophet of the Hindu religion, his secretary wrote, "Such matters, as no reference occurs to them in the teachings, are left for students of history and religion to resolve and clarify."
Are left to students of history and religion to resolve. Friends, that's you. So that's why I bring it up here. This is a question that Shirley thinks that it's really up to us. We're the ones who are to resolve this. Baha'u'llah also wrote in the Tablet of Wisdom,
For every land we have prescribed a portion, for every occasion an allotted share, for every pronouncement an appointed time. In every land we have set up a luminary of knowledge, and when the time foreordained is at hand, it will shine resplendent above its horizon, as decreed by God, the all-knowing, the all-wise. Indeed, the knowledge of thy Lord pervadeth the heavens and the earth.
in every land, and that would include the Americas. Abdu'l-Baha, and as many are not aware of this, I think, the tablet to Amir Khan. But Amir Khan was a merchant in Iran and had asked Abdu'l-Baha several questions. And Abdu'l-Baha responded to him by saying,
In ancient times, the people of America were, through their northern regions, close to Asia, that is separated from Asia by a strait. Undoubtedly, in those regions, the call of God must have been raised in ancient times, but it hath been forgotten now.
I find this quote interesting for a couple of reasons. One, we see Abdu'l-Baha here using contemporary science or contemporary thought, agreeing or telling about the fact that historians are saying the indigenous peoples came from Asia. And then he's merging that with Baha'i thought, that the call of God must have been raised in these regions. So this question is not just a mental exercise. I think we have to recognize it as consequences today for teaching the faith to indigenous populations. Working in the Four Corners area, I'm aware of so many indigenous communities who believe that their religion is from God. And how do Baha'is interact with them? What do we say? Shoghi Effendi, in a later dated April 17, 1936, to an individual believer, expanded on his thought more by addressing Hinduism. But I think it has some meaning for us today.
The origin of this Hinduism and many other religions that abound in India are quite unknown to us, and even the Orientalists and the students of religion are not in complete accord about the results of their investigations in that field. The Baha'i writings also do not refer specifically to any of these forms of current religion in India. So the Guardian feels it impossible to give you any definite and detailed information on this subject. He would urge you, however, to carry on your studies in that field, although its immensity is well nigh bewildering, with the view of bringing the message to the Hindus. The task of converting this section of the Indian population is a most vital obligation, although the Guardian is fully aware of the many difficulties that it presents.
Now substitute the Indian for Native American Indian, and you'll see the importance here of this quote. And much of it applies. The origins of the religions are not quite sure. There's many different Native American religions. How does it all fit together? Well, once again, that's us as academics to sort of resolve. In a letter to an individual leader dated 13th of March, 1950, Shoghi Effendi explained further.
We cannot possibly add names of people we or anyone else think might be lesser prophets to those found in the Quran, the Bible, and our own scriptures. For only these can we consider authentic books.
And if I can quote Bill Collins in his review of an article that Christopher Buck wrote on Native messengers of God in Canada. He wrote,
Rather than seeing Shoghi Effendi's stricture on adding names as a limiting of belief, why not see it in a different light? Shoghi Effendi limited what can be claimed officially. Perhaps what he did is free the Baha'i community to understand and accept other possible divine representatives on the basis of criteria established elsewhere in the Baha'i writings.
so that brings us to this question of why study Quetzalcoatl? What's his importance in all this? Well, first off, in a post-colonial world, indigenous cultures need to have a stand beside them. They were not inferior cultures. They were dominated by a culture that was militarily mighty, but that does not mean superior. By studying Quetzalcoatl and other indigenous messengers, it helps us to connect other peoples to the faith and helps us expand our own understanding of the divine. It's when I've talked to Native American elders or Buddhists, or I had a nice conversation with a Hindu Brahmin once, that I expand out my own understanding of the divine and of the teachings of Baha'u'llah. And as I've been stressing here, it helps us bring the message of this new day of Baha'u'llah to these same indigenous cultures. Now, there's no way of knowing for certain that a messenger from the Americas was a manifestation. So I cannot tell you Quetzalcoatl was a manifestation. So it's never going to be official. And what I say today, you can guess, will probably change as other scholars weigh in, as we learn more. But this, I hope, is the beginning of looking at these, or continuing this discussion of indigenous messengers of God. Quetzalcoatl was an important figure in pre-colonial Mesoamerica. Was he a manifestation? But to answer that question, I realized I needed to lay out a list of qualifications. What was my criteria for a manifestation? And nowhere in the writings could I see, well, they had to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I had to go through the writings myself, and I did come up with 5 criteria. The first is that he is virtuous, possesses heavenly attributes, and has innate knowledge.
And since there can be no tie of direct intercourse to bind the one true God with his creation, and no resemblance whatever can exist between the transient and the eternal, the contingent and the absolute, he hath ordained that in every age and dispensation, a pure and stainless soul must be made manifest in the kingdoms of heaven and earth.
Second, he elevates the spiritual and moral standing of the people among whom he appears.
When a movement fundamentally religious makes a weak nation strong, changes a nondescript tribal people into a mighty and powerful civilization, rescues them from captivity and elevates them to sovereignty, transforms their ignorance into knowledge, and endows them with the impotence to advance in all degrees of development, it becomes evident that religion is the cause of man's attainment to honor and sublimity.
My third criteria is that he actually brings new teachings, new laws, in a movement to appraise the society in which he appears.
They establish a new religion and make new creatures of men. They change the they change the general morals, promote new customs and rules, renew the cycle and the law. Their appearance is like the season of spring, which arrays all earthly beings in a new garment and gives them a new life.
My fourth criteria is inaugurating a new cycle in human history. This is the whole idea of progressive revelation, of course, that each manifestation of God builds on revelations previous.
In cycles gone by, each one of the manifestations of God hath had his own rank in the world of existence, and each hath represented a stage in the development of humanity.
And the fifth one was one that I found just recently in rereading the Kitab Gam, where Baha'u'llah said the manifestation of God is invariably unrecognized and persecuted in his day.
Not one single manifestation of holiness hath appeared, but he was afflicted by the denials, the repudiation, and the vehement opposition of the people around him. Thus it hath been revealed, O the misery of men, no messenger cometh unto them, but they laugh him to scorn. Again he saith, each nation hath plotted darkly against their messenger to lay violent hold on him, and disputed with vain words to invalidate the truth.
So now I've set up the stage. I need to tell you about some of the problems we face with Quetzalcoatl, because they're immense. When it comes to studying indigenous messengers of God in the New World, we deal with this process of colonialism, which unfortunately has erased a lot of the history. Quetzalcoatl appears to have been, I have to say appear because we are trying to figure out who he was. He appears to be a mythic god and a real historical figure. So we're actually dealing with two Quetzalcoatls or maybe more. Let's look at the term. The word Quetzalcoatl, I think, is important because it's a compound word combining this beautiful tropical bird with this plumage that's very bright and brilliant with the lowly snake, something that crawls on the ground, that material world, with something that flies in the heavens. And that's the secret, I think, to Quetzalcoatl. The historical figure lived, I think. Most historians that I've read are in agreement with that. Probably 95% of historians think that there was a real Quetzalcoatl at some point in history. But the term, we think, also meant God was dedicated, or a priest was dedicated to the god Quetzalcoatl. So in some ways there could be many Quetzalcoatls as well. The historical figure that I'm looking at to make a distinction is often referred to as Seacatl, Topiltzin Quetzalcoatl, or simply Quetzalcoatl. But I might be using all three of those names interchangeably. Now, when the Spanish conquistadors conquered Mexico, they burned most of the Aztec records. And I find many people are unaware that the Aztecs had books. They weren't books in the European sense, which confuses people. They were picture books. It was the beginning of writing, more like Chinese writing. But they had these long books. This is the Codex Barbonicus here in the library of the French National Assembly in Paris. But the Spanish saw them as instruments of the devil, and they were ordered burned. The Apostolic Inquisitor Juan de Zumaronga ordered them all burned in 1535. However, 16 books, now called codices, survived by being sent to friends or institutions in Europe. But this shows you what I'm talking about, what it actually looked like. Their books were not bound together like Western books. They were like huge accordions, more like your Roman scrolls. So it's a whole different way of thinking of a book. And then the pictures were placed in a sequence, but not the sequence that we would read. Because we're dealing with a whole different culture here, there's no connection to the Western world. The Aztec codices then are the primary documents for the study. I should also mention that then Franciscan friars studied Aztec religion with Nahuatl students that they were instructed in Spanish. So we also have codices where the students painted in the traditional writing style and then wrote in Nahuatl and then translated it to Spanish. So in a sense, we have this document that's all three languages together. And there's a couple of those, and the one that I'll be using a lot is the Codex Florentino, done by Fray Sahagun. But they can also be combined with the archaeological evidence. So we have the archaeology as well that gives us some clues as to Quetzalcoatl himself. Now we have to see this evidence through Spanish eyes, unfortunately, or people who were being Hispanicized by the Spanish, giving them a whole different language. And the thing I want to stress is the collision of cultures. You look at these pictures of Aztec deities, and they're just bizarre. It's like what's going to be one day if we ever have contact with another civilization from outer space. What will their gods look like? I mean, it sort of looks that way to people. They don't look like anything you would see in the Greco-Roman world, because it's a completely different culture. They value different things. Feathers were very valued, which was lost on the Spanish. They didn't understand that. But that was very much a part of Aztec culture. So we have to understand that they were seeing this value system the Spanish did not appreciate. The process is filtered both through the Nahuatl. Nahuatl is the language of the Aztec and the Toltec peoples of central Mexico. And that Nahuatl then goes through Spanish and then goes through English as well. And the understanding becomes European. So they start using words like redemption and resurrection. And that what we're really seeing is it's Nahuatl peoples telling us what they understand of Spanish Catholicism, and Spanish Catholics trying to tell us what they understand about Nahuatl traditions. And it gets all what could be very confusing. For example, Fray Sahagun, who compiled the Florentine Codex, he thought that Quetzalcoatl was the return, or the St. Thomas somehow getting over to the Americas and preaching to the Americans. And he became convinced that this was this apostle of Christ here. And then recently, other faiths have appropriated Quetzalcoatl. The Mormons see him as confirmation of the Book of Mormon. So we have to be careful, I think, with this too. We have this complicated heritage that we're looking at as we look at Quetzalcoatl. Something important, I believe, happened in Mesoamerica. What was it? So let's look at the story of Quetzalcoatl. And this is the way he was depicted in the Codex Rabbonicus. And again, that picture looks bizarre probably for most of you, but we're dealing with another culture. The stories or the legends say Tolpiltzin, Quetzalcoatl's parents, were divine or semi-divine beings, in a sense like Joseph and Mary. His father was Mixcoatl, the god of hunting and war, who conquered many Toltec towns. Probably what that's referenced to is a real historic figure. His father was known for his conquests and the buildings of what would become these Toltec kingdoms. His mother was Chimalma, the goddess of fertility, who conceived miraculously when she swallowed an emerald. So we have a case of immaculate conception here. His father died before he was born. His mother died in childbirth, so he essentially was an orphan. As a young man, he underwent 7 years of penance. And this was very much a Toltec Nahuatl tradition, where they would pierce themselves with thorns, usually in the ankles, sometimes in the tongue or other parts of the body, seeking divine assistance. And the Spanish took this as an act of penance, but I think it was more than that, sort of like the vision quest on the plains. It's trying to connect with the divine by, I don't want to say punishment, but by bodily pain. But Quetzalcoatl was well known for this. He was a very pious youth. But he's born into a world of conflict and combat, so he becomes a warrior, shows extraordinary skill, and because of that, he is elevated to be the first king of Tula. Tula and Toulon, we think it was the same city. And he becomes a model philosopher king for Mesoamerica. Under his leadership, the arts flourish, new crafts are established, the people are happy.
In truth, they invented all the wonderful, precious, marvelous things which they made. They invented the art of medicine, discovered and found for the first time, used green stones, fine turquoise, and common obsidian, the emerald green jade, all kinds of wondrous precious stones.
He taught them astonishing agricultural methods that are now unfortunately forgotten.
The cotton fields were miraculously colored. Burnt red, yellow, rose-colored, violet, green, azure, verdigris, whitish, brown, shadowy, rose red, and coyote-colored. So they grew. They did not dye them.
And he increased the agricultural productivity.
All the squashes were very large and some quite round, and the ears of maize were as large as hand-grinding stones and long. They could hardly be embraced in one's arms. And the amaranth plants, barely they climbed up them. They could be climbed.
So now his followers become known as Toltecs. And that's what they said the word Toltec meant to followers of Quetzalcoatl. The city of Tula became an example of this excellence. Although it's just an archaeological ruin today, he built temples there, which were known for their beauty, sophistication, and instruction. The buildings themselves taught the principles of his religion. According to David Crosco, my mentor, Tula became a model for other Mesoamerican capitals, like Tenochtitlan and Cholula. He preached against human sacrifice, and I think this is important because human sacrifice was so important in Mesoamerica out of this belief that the gods sacrificed themselves to create the world, and so people have to constantly sacrifice to keep the world going. But Quetzalcoatl preached against it.
He would only sacrifice serpents, birds, and butterflies.
And that got him in trouble. And he would be persecuted for that. Interestingly, going through all the legends, some legends would say Quetzalcoatl taught human sacrifice. But those are the legends that come from the Maya. And David Crosco, once again my mentor, he thinks that was other priests in the Quetzalcoatl tradition bringing the human sacrifice to the Maya. But because he opposed human sacrifice, he gets into this dispute with Quetzalcoatl and ends up being disgraced. Quetzalcoatl means smoking mirror. He's the god of night, sorcery, and war. And he organized a movement against Quetzalcoatl because Quetzalcoatl opposed him and his desire for human sacrifice. Through using tricks and deceptions, he has a magical mirror. He disguises himself as an old man and shows Quetzalcoatl his body. And Quetzalcoatl becomes ashamed of his body. And then to heal him, he makes this poultice of maguey fibers or the agave plant and mushrooms, and gives it to Quetzalcoatl. And Quetzalcoatl takes one drink. He says he's only gonna have one drink, but then he gets fooled into taking 2, then 3, and then 5, and apparently got very drunk. And then his sister is called for, who's a celibate priestess that everyone knows, and they get drunk as well.
No more did they say, we are fasting. No more did they puncture themselves with thorns. Nothing more did they do at the break of day. And at dawn they were filled with remorse, their spirits were heavy.
So they did other unspeakable things, and were ashamed. So ashamed and dispirited, Quetzalcoatl vows to leave Tula forever. It's a self-imposed exile. Then Tezcatlipoca takes over and the Toltec civilization declines. He reverses everything, and that's the end of Tula's greatness. But Quetzalcoatl goes on in self-imposed exile and wanders through this dark brown region all through Mesoamerica, performing miracles. He climbs a rock, rests at the top, and they say his handprints are still visible there today. As he looks back on Tula and cries, his tears fall, and they mark a rock, and those teardrops can still be seen today. When he needed to get over a mountain, he creates a chasm in the mountain and go through the mountain instead. So all these miracles is not unlike what you read in the Gospels about the miracles of Christ. In fact, he heals the sick. He also builds temples for prayer. He leaves his disciples behind to govern. He journeys into the Maya land of the Yucatan and unites the warring tribes there. For a time, he actually goes back to Cholula and becomes the king or advisor to the king. He has a dream that his end is approaching, so he sets off to the coast, weeps one last time, and then cremates himself. The ashes fly upward and are transformed into the birds of beautiful plumage. His heart rises to the heavens and becomes the morning star.
And after his ashes there were all gone, then the heart of Quetzalcoatl rose up, as they saw, and according to their belief, and it went into the sky. It entered the sky. The old people said that it changed into the star that appears at dawn, Venus. So they called it the Lord of the Dawn.
And for those of you who read the long healing prayer, I cannot read the long healing prayer and that line about being the Lord of the Dawn without thinking of Quetzalcoatl. But I think it's another meaning of associating that with Venus, because every time I see Venus, I think of Quetzalcoatl. And actually what I think of now is a manifestation of God, and I've been amazed to me that we have this connection that the skies are reminding us. An alternative vision says he went to the coast and sailed off on a raft of serpents to the east with the prophecy that he would return. And interestingly, Cortez arrived. Now, one of the differences between the Western world and the Americas, the Aztecs had a century and a calendar, a very exact calendar, you've probably heard of it, but the century was 52 years. And every year was the same. The first year has the same name as the first year of the next cycle, just like January is the first month every year. So Cortez arrived in the year 1 Reed, which was the year that Quetzalcoatl was born and the year that Quetzalcoatl left. So that's why they say that they mistook Cortez for Quetzalcoatl being the return. But I'm looking at it a whole different way too. What Cortez was he returned with the teaching there's to be no human sacrifice, because Cortez put an end to human sacrifice. So you can think about that too, what that means. So what's Quetzalcoatl manifestation? He was virtuous, possessed heavenly attributes, and had innate knowledge. Don't bother reading the quotes, Christy, because we're running out of time. Truly it began with him, they say, it flowed out. He elevated the spiritual and moral standing of the people with whom he appeared. He's known for his piety. He modeled the way to approach the divine. He elevated the Toltecs. They became known for their wisdom and piety. These are quotes from the codices. He brought new teachings, established new laws. His followers were Toltecs, the wise ones. Read this one.
Okay, the Toltec is wise, he is a luminary, a torch, the great smokeless torch. He imprints wisdom on other people's faces. He makes them take heart. He never misses anything. He stops, observes, and reflects.
He taught them to work whole. Sing and speak well, have good conversations, give good answers, offer good prayers. Know the honorable condition. Do not commit adultery, do not become drunk, do not give yourself immoderately to gambling, and on and on. He inaugurated a new epoch in the history of Mesoamerica. As you said, this is where everything was good. It's been compared to King Arthur. He was persecuted. Quetzalcoatl hurt him and he drove him into exile. Not unlike so many of the prophets that went into exile. So he emerges as a candidate, and that's where I'll leave it. He's a candidate for being one of the manifestations of God that history has always lost the trace of.
It is evident then that the proofs of the validity and inspiration of the prophet of God are the deeds of benevolent accomplishment and greatness emanating from him. If he proves to be instrumental in the elevation and betterment of mankind, he is undoubtedly a valid and heavenly messenger. A star has the same radiance if it shines from the east or the west. Be free from prejudice, so will you love the Son of Truth from whatever point in the horizon it may arise.
And if you have any questions, I hope you still have time.